The Harmattan wind blew harshly through the dusty streets of Olorunda, a small town tucked deep in the heart of Nigeria. Houses leaned on one another for support, their corrugated roofs, battered by years of sun and rain, and the roads were lined with dust that clung stubbornly to shoes and clothes. Emma sat by the wooden window of his family's small house, staring into the night that seemed impossibly heavy with silence. Not a single child played outside, not a single shop remained open. Everyone was afraid. Fear had become the rhythm of daily life. For months, news of bandits and terrorists had dominated every broadcast, every social media post, and every whispered conversation. The church in the next town had been raided last week, children taken into the forests, their parents left to grieve with nothing but the echoes of screams. Emma thought about Ruth, the gentle girl from his secondary school, who always carried a smile even in hard times. He hadn't seen her in months, but he knew the rumors she was among those kidnapped. And as usual, the government had said nothing. No press conference, no rescue, no reassurance, just silence. Emma's mother, Miriam, had fallen asleep beside a flickering kerosene lamp, exhausted from hours of selling tomatoes and grains in the marketplace. She snored softly, unaware of the heaviness in her son's chest. Emma rested his chin on the windowsill, the wind tugging at the thin curtain as if mocking his helplessness. His father, long gone in search of work in Lagos, had left him to navigate a world that seemed determined to swallow everyone whole. Across the country, the same story repeated itself endlessly. Roads that once bustled with life were now empty, schools had closed, farms lay untended as farmers feared ambushes in the forests. No one trusted the authorities anymore. The leaders had grown fat on the nation's wealth, protected by guards and high walls, while the ordinary citizens faced danger every day. But the country had begun murmuring. Murmurs grew in markets, in schools, in tiny kiosks, where youths huddled around a single phone screen. One video showed girls crying as they were led away from a church by masked men, another showed homes burned to ash, another showed families clutching children as bullets tore through their villages. Emma watched these videos, his stomach tightening with every frame. And then, one night, he saw it, a spark that had begun to glow in the hearts of the oppressed, a message circulating on social media, simple but incendiary. If the government won't fight for us, we must fight for ourselves. No one knew who had written it. But the words traveled faster than wind, faster than the whispers of fear that had paralyzed the nation. People shared the message with shaking hands, as though the very act of forwarding it was an act of defiance. Among those who saw it was Chisom, a young woman of 24, fierce in spirit and fearless in action. She lived in a modest house in Enugu, her walls plastered with posters from past campaigns. She had organized clean water, school supplies, community kitchens. She had always been a fighter, but the video of Ruth and the other kidnapped girls lit a fire inside her that could not be contained. That night, she wept, but her tears were not the kind of sorrow that defeated people. They were tears that fueled courage. By the next morning, the streets began to stir. Emma noticed posters appearing on walls he had passed countless times before. They were written in bold letters: National Protest End Bad Government. Led by Chisom Adewale. Join us for our future. The air was electric. People spoke in hushed, but determined tones. Markets buzzed, not with trade, but with planning. Students discussed routes and safety measures. Mothers whispered instructions to their children. Even the children sensed something different, a hope that had been buried beneath fear for too long. Chisom was everywhere. Videos of her climbed rooftops and street corners, her voice amplified through a megaphone, carrying a passion that reached beyond the city walls. They think we are powerless because we are unarmed. They think we are afraid because we are poor. They think we are voiceless because they refuse to listen. But a nation becomes unstoppable the moment its people realize their strength. Emma felt chills run down his spine as he watched her, recognizing her as the new symbol of courage. Across Nigeria, citizens began to gather in secret, planning marches and protests, preparing for a confrontation with a government that had ignored their suffering for far too long. By evening, Olorunda was alive again, not with the sounds of commerce, but with whispers of resistance. Emma joined a small group of friends and neighbors, their faces grim, but resolute. They mapped routes, shared supplies, and rehearsed chants that would one day echo through cities and towns across the nation. For the first time in months, the air was heavy not with fear, but with anticipation, the kind that precedes monumental change. The first march was modest, a few hundred people, holding placards that begged for justice, demanding protection, and calling for reform. But it was a start. Every step they took, every chant they raised, sent ripples through the government's complacency. And in that movement, a realization dawned: the people, if united, were stronger than the fear that had kept them silent for so long. The next morning, Olorunda was stirring with a quiet electricity. Mothers walked through the dusty streets carrying water jars, pausing to whisper to neighbors about what they had seen online. Shops remained closed, but more people were moving than the day before, quietly organizing, quietly sharing supplies. Emma felt a new kind of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. He was just a boy from a small town, but now, like everyone else, he felt the weight of change in his hands. Chisom's voice had spread across the country like wildfire. Even those in remote villages had seen her video, heard her words, and felt something they hadn't in years: hope. She wasn't a politician, she wasn't wealthy or connected. She was one of them, and that made her more dangerous to the complacent government than any army could ever be. Emma walked with a group of friends through the streets, carrying handmade placards with slogans like, "Our children are not your pawns. Protect us or step aside. We will rise." As they approached the central square, they saw hundreds of people gathering, more than they had expected. The crowd was a patchwork of humanity: traders, students, teachers, farmers, fathers, mothers, children clinging to their parents' hands. Their eyes were tired, faces worn, but their determination burned bright. The local authorities had heard of the gatherings, of course. Police officers in faded uniforms watched from the edges of the streets, their hands resting nervously on the butt of their rifles. But even their presence couldn't intimidate the people. Every step the citizens took toward the square was a declaration: they would no longer be silent. Emma spotted Chisom in the distance, standing on a wooden crate with her arms wide, speaking through a worn megaphone. Her voice carried like a storm. "We are the children of this land. We will not be scared. We will not be silenced. We will demand the safety of our families, the lives of our children, and the justice we have been denied." Her words struck like lightning, electrifying the crowd. Emma felt goosebumps rise along his arms. The crowd responded with shouts, claps, and drumbeats that seemed to vibrate the ground itself. Olorunda had not seen anything like this in decades: a sea of citizens united in a single voice against the corruption and inaction that had ruled their lives for too long. Yet the government was not blind. Word of the gathering reached officials in the capital, and whispers of concern circulated in high offices. The president had ignored countless pleas, but this was different. The videos, the live streams, and the sheer number of people gathering threatened to expose the nation's failure to the world. Emma, still clutching his placard, felt a tug at his sleeve. He turned to see Ruth's younger brother, Daniel, holding back tears. They took Ruth and the others. And the government won't help, he whispered, voice trembling. Emma knelt and held Daniel's shoulders. We won't stop. We will get them back. Chisom, she will lead us. The protest grew day by day. Cities across Nigeria began to mirror Olorunda, thousands of voices rising together, shouting for justice. Stories of ordinary families who had lost everything spread like wildfire, uniting people who had never met but now shared a single purpose. Meanwhile, Chisom organized the movement with precision. She created safe routes for gatherings, coordinated volunteers to distribute food and water, and ensured that messages reached remote towns through social media and word of mouth. Every act she took strengthened the morale of the citizens. She was no longer just an activist, she had become a symbol of defiance, courage, and hope. The government attempted to intimidate them. Riot police arrived in Lagos and Abuja, tear gas was fired in some towns, and soldiers patrolled the roads. Yet, each act of oppression only fueled the people's determination. Emma witnessed it firsthand when tear gas descended on the crowd. Mothers held their children close, teenagers linked arms, and the chanting never stopped. Fear could not overpower unity. One night, after a long day of protests, Emma returned home exhausted. The streets were quiet again, but the air was heavy with anticipation. He sat by the window, staring at the moon, thinking about the girls still trapped somewhere far away. Sleep eluded him, replaced by visions of danger, courage, and hope. And then, in the middle of the night, a message appeared on his phone. It was from Chisom. Tomorrow we march to the governor's office. Bring everyone you can. This is the day we show them we are not afraid. Emma's heart pounded. This was no longer a small protest. It was a declaration, a turning point. The citizens of Nigeria were stepping into history, guided by the bravery of a young woman who refused to remain silent. He looked out of the window again, the moonlight reflecting off the dusty streets, and whispered, "We will bring them back. We will bring hope back." The first cracks in the government's indifference had begun to show, and the citizens, once silent and fearful, were finding their voices. This was only the beginning. The fire had been lit, and nothing could extinguish it now. The dawn broke over Olorunda with a muted orange glow, the sky smeared with the kind of quiet that always precedes stormy days. Emma stepped out into the streets, his feet crunching over the dusty path, carrying a bundle of supplies and a placard with the words, "We demand justice. We demand safety." The streets were already alive with people, hundreds streaming toward the central square. Mothers held children on their hips, fathers carried the elderly, and teenagers chanted rhythmically, their voices weaving together in a song of defiance. Every face showed exhaustion, everybody carried the weight of grief, yet their determination blazed brighter than the sun above. Chisom was there, standing on a makeshift platform, her dark hair caught in the wind. She looked at the crowd, her eyes scanning for familiar faces, and her voice rang out, sharp, steady, and unyielding. Every child taken, every family broken, every life lost to silence, today we say enough. Today we reclaim our country. Today, Nigeria listens. Emma's heart surged. The energy was palpable, it was more than hope now. It was a force, a living, breathing movement that could not be ignored. Yet, beneath the exhilaration, a shadow lingered. The government had grown aware of the scale, and the insurgents still lurked, watching, waiting, and ready to exploit any moment of weakness. By midday, news of Olorunda's protest had spread far and wide. In nearby towns, similar gatherings had formed: Ibadan, Enugu, Kaduna, Port Harcourt, all demanding justice. Citizens were no longer whispering in fear. They were marching boldly, chanting, singing, and raising placards that told stories the government had tried to bury, stories of families devastated by violence, of children kidnapped, and of communities abandoned. Emma found himself at the front of the march, next to Daniel, Ruth's younger brother. Daniel's small hand clutched Emma's sleeve tightly, but his eyes were fierce, burning with determination. "We will save them," he whispered. Chisom had anticipated the government's reaction. She had arranged for volunteers to document everything, to stream live to the world, and to ensure that even if the authorities tried to suppress the protests, the truth would be visible to everyone. The plan was bold, and the risk was enormous, but there was no turning back. By late afternoon, the first signs of opposition arrived. A convoy of military trucks rumbled into the outskirts of the square, soldiers stepping down with rifles ready, faces hardened and unyielding. Their presence sent a shiver through the crowd, but Chisom raised her arms, signaling for calm. "Stand your ground. Do not be provoked. We will not fight them, but we will not move." Emma felt his knees shake. The soldiers shouted commands, their voices carrying the weight of authority and threat. Tear gas canisters appeared in the hands of the first units, and the crowd's first wave of panic rippled outward. Mothers held their children close, the elderly leaned on each other, some teenagers faltered, but then Chisom's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Hold steady. Fear is their weapon. Unity is ours." And hold steady they did. The crowd refused to disperse. They pressed forward slowly, chanting louder, their collective voice growing into a roar that drowned the commands of the soldiers. Emma saw mothers shielding their children, fathers forming protective walls, and teenagers linking arms in defiance. The courage was raw, dangerous, and utterly contagious. But danger was not limited to the streets. Insurgents, emboldened by months of chaos, began to exploit the unrest. Emma received messages warning of ambushes near the outskirts of towns, and families huddled together, praying for safety. One night, a report came through that a group of bandits had infiltrated a nearby village, kidnapping more children while the attention of the authorities remained diverted to the protests. Chisom knew that this moment was pivotal. She organized a team of volunteers to protect vulnerable communities, coordinating with local leaders to ensure no one was left unguarded. Emma joined these efforts, helping to deliver food and supplies to families who had been cut off for days. The work was grueling, exhausting, but the people refused to give up. As the week progressed, the government's response escalated. Politicians began to release statements, promising investigations that would never materialize. Security forces attempted to blockade streets, detain protest leaders, and intimidate citizens with patrols and threats. But each attempt only strengthened the resolve of the people. Emma watched it all unfold. The fear that had once gripped Oloronda was replaced by a powerful, unstoppable courage. Late one night, as he returned home from distributing supplies, Emma saw Chisom speaking with a group of young leaders. Her face was streaked with sweat and dust, but her eyes burned with determination. "We cannot stop," she said. "Every step we take is for Ruth, for the children, for every life taken by those who believe silence protects them. We march forward, we fight with courage. And we will win." Emma felt a shiver of both fear and excitement. He knew the coming days would be the hardest, the most dangerous, yet for the first time, he truly believed that they could succeed. The citizens of Nigeria were awakening, and the world could no longer turn away. The first serious clash was coming. Emma knew it. The government would attempt to crush the movement, insurgents would exploit every moment of chaos, and lives would be at risk. But for the first time in years, the people had found their voice, and once a nation speaks as one, nothing can silence it. The sun had barely risen over Oloronda when the town square began to fill again, this time with even more people than the previous week. Emma walked beside Daniel, Ruth's younger brother, carrying water bottles and bundles of food. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and determination, and each footstep seemed to echo the heartbeat of the nation. Word had spread like wildfire. Towns from across the state had sent delegates to join the protests, and the numbers now were staggering. Streets that had once been empty were alive with the sound of chanting, drums, and songs of hope. The people moved like a river, unstoppable and relentless, flowing toward the seat of local government with a single, unified purpose: justice. Chisom stood on the back of a truck at the center of the square, scanning the crowd. Her voice rang out, strong and unwavering, carrying messages of courage to thousands who had never dared to raise their voices before. We march not for revenge, but for justice. We march not for anger, but for truth. We march for every child taken, every life lost, and every family abandoned. Today, we claim what is ours: safety, dignity, and a government that answers to its people. Emma felt his chest tighten. The words were powerful, almost tangible, and the crowd responded with a thunderous roar. The air seemed to hum with energy, each person a note in the symphony of resistance. Mothers held their children close, yet their eyes burned with defiance. Fathers raised fists high, and teenagers chanted until their voices were raw, refusing to be silenced. The government could no longer ignore the movement. Officers arrived in greater numbers than ever before, trucks blocking streets, soldiers wielding batons, and riot gear gleaming under the harsh morning sun. Tear gas canisters were loaded, and a tense hush fell over the crowd. But Chisom, as always, remained calm. Her eyes met Emma's briefly, giving him a nod that seemed to say, "We are ready." The first wave of tear gas was released. It hissed through the crowd, stinging eyes and burning throats, forcing some to stagger and cough. Mothers clutched their children, shielding them from the smoke. Emma coughed violently but pressed forward, helping Daniel and others maintain their line. The chant never stopped. The people, unified and fearless, pressed onward despite the gas and shouting officers. As the day progressed, word spread that a convoy of government officials was en route to the city to assess the protests. This created a sense of urgency among the citizens. They needed to make their voices impossible to ignore. Emma saw Chisom coordinating volunteers, ensuring that every street, alley, and square was filled with people, banners, and drums. Her energy seemed limitless, her courage contagious. But danger was multiplying. Insurgents, seeing the distraction of the massive protest, attempted attacks on nearby villages. Emma received a message warning of armed men moving toward a rural town where many families had fled for safety. Without hesitation, Chisom organized a rapid response team, volunteers who would protect the vulnerable, deliver food and water, and, if necessary, confront the attackers. Emma joined the team. Fear had once paralyzed him, but now, every step, every action, every word mattered. He knew Ruth's life, and the lives of countless others, depended on people like him, people like Chisom, who refused to turn away from the danger. By evening, the sheer scale of the protests forced national attention. Journalists from major news outlets arrived, recording the chanting crowds and broadcasting images worldwide. Hashtags trended across social media, and the government found itself facing scrutiny from both citizens and the international community. The night fell heavy over Oloronda, but the energy of the people did not wane. Campfires were lit in the square as thousands of citizens remained, singing songs of resilience and unity. Emma sat beside Daniel, exhausted but hopeful, and whispered, "We're closer now. I can feel it." They can't ignore us anymore. Chisom walked among the people, checking on families, offering encouragement, and silently planning the next day's movements. Her eyes reflected the flames of the campfires and the fire of determination that had set the nation ablaze. Somewhere in the shadows, government officials watched through binoculars, their faces pale with unease. The protests were no longer manageable, the citizens were no longer fearful. The movement had grown too large, too organized, too determined to be crushed by mere force. And in the distance, insurgents realized that the distraction of the protests would soon be their undoing. Emma thought about the girls Ruth and the others, and a resolve settled within him like stone: they would be rescued, no matter the cost. The first cracks in the corrupt system were beginning to show, and as night settled over the town, a new dawn of possibility began to form in the hearts of the people. Emma looked around at the crowd, thousands of faces lit by firelight and determination, and whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning. The people will rise, and nothing can stop them now."